Okay, welcome to UK Column. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Williamson, former Labour MP, and of course, anti-war activist, and Vanessa Beeley from Damascus, as usual. Now, we're going to get straight into it today, but because we've got a lot to get through. But I want to start off with a little piece of video. Now, this is Peter Ford speaking at the peace rally that was held in Edinburgh a couple of months ago. And he's talking about the question of why there is no peace movement in the UK at the moment.
If anything, Britain is chief among the warmongers. At least in America, there is contestation, there's argument, debate. You get nothing of that here. In America, you have leading Republican candidates, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, are both opposed to America throwing away billions on an unwinnable war. You also have Kennedy on the Democratic side, equally opposed. Where are their equivalents here? There is no discussion here, no debate. And for that, I blame one man. And his name begins with J. And he's something of a discredited figure. Yes, you've got it. Jeremy Corbyn. Yes. Not Johnson, Jeremy Corbyn. Why? Because he ended up discrediting the Peace Party. The Labour Party used to be the party of peace until approximately the days of Tony Blair. But there was still a strong peace current within the Labour Party. And Jeremy Corbyn was the leader on this platform, got himself elected on an anti-warmongering platform. But for a variety of reasons, he screwed up. Partly because he was demonized by the media, but also through his own failings and failure to stand by his colleagues, his loyal colleagues, and by his beliefs. So the implosion of Corbynism left a huge gap in British politics, but not one which is empty to this day. What's happened is that the Starmer, the people in the Labour elite, have rushed to portray themselves as even more patriotic and jingoistic than the Tories. And they've succeeded in that. And the result is that there is no peace lobby. There'll be no restraint whatsoever on the British government throughout this Ukraine conflict. That is why we are the biggest warmongers, even bigger than America.
So, Chris Williamson, I'd like to welcome you to the programme and begin by asking, is Peter Ford correct? Is he being fair?
Well, Jeremy's programme was incredibly popular, and I think his weakness and his mistake was in not fighting back against the bad faith actors. There was a concerted effort by the Zionist lobby, by the corporate capitalist elites in Britain to undermine him. And indeed, there were other players involved, from Mike Pompeo, in the US, to Benjamin Netanyahu, all of whom had intervened in the British democratic process. Pompeo saying words to the effect that, they couldn't risk a Corbyn premiership. So there was an enormous amount of pressure on him. But his mistake, as I say, was in trying to, or prioritising, I suppose, keeping the Parliamentary Labour Party together, trying to avoid a split. And in not actually supporting the democracy reforms that I was championing, and indeed that Jeremy had previously himself supported, and I think it's certainly in the early part of my campaign, the Democracy Roadshow that I engaged in, he was supportive of that. That was his failure, in not actually fighting back against the bad faith actors who were accusing him of anti-Semitism and of actually facilitating that. As Peter was saying there, defending were his Praetorian Guard, because the people that were being thrown under the bus were all Jeremy's strongest supporters, people like myself, obviously, but also prominent individuals like Jackie Walker, who was had been the vice chair of Momentum, and Mark Wadsworth, the well-known black rights activist who introduced Nelson Mandela to the Stephen Lawrence family, and many, many others. And I said on a number of occasions to Jeremy, stop saying sorry, Jeremy, because you of all people have got nothing to apologise for, and all you're doing is feeding the beast. And I also prevailed upon, without success, the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs inside the Parliamentary Labour Party to urge them to push back, and indeed to push Jeremy and to some extent John McDonnell, who I thought was on side at that point in time, to go further, not just on their anti-imperialist stance, but on a range of topics domestically, to create space. I mean, my point was that we need to create space for John and Jeremy to occupy, because all the pressure is coming from the right, coming from the parliamentary right wing of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and obviously from the media and from the Zionist lobby and from other powerful vested interests. So I'm perhaps a little bit more charitable than Peter, but definitely his weakness was in allowing those vested interests to get the upper hand. And Jeremy had a chance, might not still have succeeded, but he had a chance, I think, of actually really changing, Britain for the better. But in order to achieve that, he needed a degree of ruthlessness against his enemies, and that's what was lacking. Apologies if they're banging, by the way. I'm having Windows installed, so you may hear some banging in the background, but hopefully it will be intermittent and not too disturbing.
No problem. Thanks for that, Chris. Vanessa, just get your thoughts on that and what Chris has just said, and also what Peter was saying there.
I agree with Chris. I also agree with Peter, I think. However you look at it, we lost a tremendous opportunity to push through policies that might have at least put a brake on the neo-colonialist policies of successive governments, whether it was Labour, New Labour, or Tory. I had the impression, I think back in 2017, from one of Corbyn's advisors, that there was not only external pressure, there was also internal pressure, and that he didn't have enough support on the backbenches in Parliament to, let's say, take a stand on various issues, including Syria, because that was what I was talking about at the time. So I guess my question, if I can, to Chris is, you've kind of explained or touched on why Jeremy didn't stand his ground. But was it bad advice? Was it weakness? Was it vulnerability that made him abandon his own principles and integrity over certain issues? And of course, particularly Syria, because that was really front of house at that time when Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party. So I guess for me to understand exactly how somebody could renege on really what appeared to be their most integral priorities and principles.
I think it was a combination of all those things, if I'm honest, Vanessa. Clearly, he was getting very, very, very bad advice from the people who were around him in the leader's office. Their default position when any criticism, particularly in relation to issues of, that were important to the Zionist lobby, to the Israel lobby, their default position was to surrender, was to run the white flag up the pole, as it were, and to capitulate. Yes, of course, there was not much support in the Parliamentary Labour Party, but it couldn't have been any worse, could it, if Jeremy had taken a stand? And frankly, in my experience, all the MPs, and this includes those I was a bit of a rarity. I'm not trying to sort of blow my own trumpet, as it were, but it seems to me I was the only one that was prepared to stand on principle, because in the end, they all prioritised their career. And I think if Jeremy, Boris Johnson gave a masterclass in how to be a strong leader when he withdrew the whip from a number of Tory grandees. I mean, Winston Churchill's grandson, a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, were among the people that he purged when they were opposing the stance he was taking in relation to Brexit. And I think had Jeremy taken a firm stance against some of the worst offenders, people like Ian Austin, who ultimately left the Labour Party and has been elevated to the House of Lords by the Conservatives, then I think, many of these people would have fallen in line. And of course, the other fatal error that Jeremy made was in actually not getting behind the democracy reforms that I was championing. I mean, to be fair, Jeremy kicked them off himself, actually, the democracy review, but he left out of that the crucially important aspect of democracy in terms of Labour Party democracy, to make MPs accountable to the party that they represent, to the membership, to the grassroots, who are much more in touch in reality with issues on the ground in the country, in the constituencies, as it were. I mean, as I often used to make this point on the Democracy Roadshow meetings, I quoted Ed Miliband when he was standing to become the Labour leader in 2010. He said, if we'd listened to our members a little bit more, we wouldn't have made as many mistakes in government. And absolutely right, I pointed out, we wouldn't have got involved in the illegal invasion of Iraq. We wouldn't have introduced tuition fees. We wouldn't have cut back on social security benefits. We would have had a meaningful industrial strategy, etc., etc. We wouldn't have further deregulated the banks, and so the list goes on. And had Jeremy, I think, supported those reforms, that particular reform, then that would have been carried at the Labour Party conference, because it was overwhelmingly supported by the grassroots. Over 90% of the constituency party delegates at the 2018 conference supported open selections, making MPs accountable to their members so that they would have to go through an endorsement process between every election. But Jeremy implored the trade union delegates, and the votes at Labour Party conference are split 50-50. 50% of the votes go to the constituency Labour parties and 50% go to the trade unions and affiliated socialist societies. And it included even trade unions like the Unite the Union that had a 2016 policy of supporting mandatory reselection for MPs, open selections. And they voted against their own policy. The only union that actually supported the grassroots membership was the Fire Brigade Union. Now, had Unite supported their own policy, that change in the constitution of the Labour Party would have gone through with a comfortable majority. And the course of history, I think, would have been different. Because, as I've said, these characters, these members of Parliament, are all careerists. And having the sword of Damocles, as it were, hanging over their heads like that, knowing that they would have to respect the policies arrived at by democratic means within the party of the membership, which are actually much more reflective of where the general public were, because if you actually looked at the policy agenda that Jeremy was putting forward, a modest socialist programme at home and an anti-imperialist agenda abroad, overwhelmingly popular with the vast majority of the British people, never mind Labour Party members. It's the members of Parliament that are out of step, with the wider general public, not the activist base. And had that been, as I say, had that gone through, then they would have fallen in line. And many of them, actually, I'll say many, a number of them would certainly have been deselected, and others would have definitely fallen in line. But when that didn't go through, and when the National Executive Committee embraced the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism in that same month in September 2018, that then emboldened the haters. It certainly emboldened the Zionist movement, and so the attacks were stepped up. Basically, that was when Jeremy signed his death warrant, signed his own death warrant, and signed the death warrant of the Corbyn project and the death warrant of an opportunity to bring about an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power in this country through the Labour Party. Now the Labour Party is totally ruined, and our only salvation now, it seems to me, is to work night and day to destroy the Labour Party and to try, as difficult as it is, to create a new vehicle to deliver that vision, which was actually set out in the 1974 Labour Party manifesto. It said in black and white that the government, a Labour government, would bring about that irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power in favour of working people and their families. That was then abandoned when Harold Wilson stepped down and Dennis Healey went to the International Monetary Fund on a false premise in 1976 that somehow Britain was running out of money, which is impossible in a country that issues its own currency. But I set all this out, actually, if I can give my book a plug, in my book, which I've written about my time in Parliament, called 10 Years Hard Labour. So I set out that the Miliband era, where he claimed to be on the left, but actually ended up being taken prisoner by the Blairite wing of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and the rise and fall of Jeremy Corbyn. And it's a tragedy. It really is a tragedy what happened. But yeah, Jeremy's mistake was all those things, I think, that you've set out there. But he alone can't be held totally responsible, because the Socialist Campaign Group also have a lot to answer for, because they didn't give him any support whatsoever in actually trying to, push the envelope and to, bring about this change, which people wanted and still want in this country.
The issues with the Labour Party and the issues with the anti-war movement seem to be related, in the sense that the one name that keeps popping up in both cases is Tony Blair. And if we think back to the Iraq War and the protests, at really the height of the strength of the anti-war movement was getting 1 million people out on the streets to protest the Iraq War. Tony Blair decided to ignore that protest. And what was disappointing for me at that time, because I was there that day, was that Tony Blair ignored the protest, and then the anti-war movement really didn't follow up and didn't continue. At least that's my memory of it anyway. And in the meantime, in the intervening years, as more conflict has happened around the world, with the UK very much driving it in many cases, we haven't seen any kind of response from the anti-war movement or the peace movement. And all the while, in the meantime, in the background, Tony Blair has been sort of pushing buttons within the Labour Party. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, and what happened after that 1 million people protest, and why we've never seen that type of event take place again.
I think it's a similar phenomenon to what we've seen since the destruction of the Corbyn project. People were demoralised, and to mobilise 1 million plus people on the street, I mean, it's quite incredible. And for that to then just be ignored, and for the illegal war, the illegal invasion to proceed, 1 million dead Iraqis, Blair, then going on and winning another election, albeit with a smaller number of votes than Jeremy Corbyn achieved in 2019. I think people were just simply demoralised, and I don't think they've ever recovered. The anti-war movement's never really recovered from that. I mean, a number of us are trying to rejuvenate it. We've established a no to NATO, no to war movement. It's still a small acorn at the moment. But of course, we know what the state is capable of in terms of the whole divide and rule strategy, the way in which progressive groups, socialist groups are infiltrated by state players to sow discord and division. And I think this, the whole issue that we have at the moment, with the sort of culture wars, are being promoted by the state. I mean, and that's not me being a conspiracy theorist. We know from the Spy Cop revelation, which only kind of scratched the surface, that state operatives did infiltrate. I mean, this is on the record. This is a matter of public record now. Did infiltrate a range of different groups, political groups, environmental groups, even to the extent, as you'll be aware, I'm sure, to impregnating some of the female members of the Green Movement, and these were state actors sent in to obviously undermine the effectiveness of the movement. I think the attacks which we're currently seeing on Russell Brand are very much part of that whole process. He's seen as too dangerous a figure with a huge platform, 7 million plus people, and he's challenging the military-industrial complex. He's challenging and exposing big pharma. He's challenging the corporate capitalist class and the damaging effect of neoliberalism. And he's had to be, they seek you to silence him. And this is what they do to all, prominent nonconformists. I mean, I've been a victim of that. I know Vanessa has. And indeed, one of the reasons that was given, spurious reasons that was given to suspend me initially from the Labour Party was because I'd met Vanessa and had tweeted some nice comments about her, about what a privilege it was to meet her. And I mean, I'd never met or heard Vanessa speak before. Now, we both attended the Beautiful Days Festival, and I think that was in 2018 as well, in August 2018, actually. And indeed, it was Peter Ford, actually, was debating the issue of Syria with Peter Tatchell, and Vanessa spoke from the floor incredibly eloquently. I was really blown away. It was a really, really eloquent and powerful contribution. And, I really wanted to sort of meet her afterwards and just shake her hand and say what a privilege it was to hear her speak and so on. And I just tweeted something to the effect that it was, a privilege to meet Vanessa Beeley at the Beautiful Days Festival. And that was one of the grounds that was given for suspending me from the Labour Party. It was just absolutely bizarre, weird, crazy. It made no sense whatsoever. It just shows how much they were scraping the barrel. But this is the problem, and this is why you need to challenge these forces, because, they take no prisoners, as we've seen, with Jeremy. And I was constantly reminding people in the Socialist Campaign Group that of Pastor Niemöller's poem, First They Came. And we're seeing that, aren't we? One by one, they're being picked off. I mean, obviously Jeremy's gone, but Diane Abbott's been kicked out. And is it Mark Tarry, another one who was has been dropped as a Labour candidate for the next election? All these things are inevitable, it seems to me, unless you fight for what you believe in. But unfortunately, they're obsessed with the Westminster bubble, too many of them. And but just back to your original point, I think, and to come back to what I originally said in relation to why the anti-war movement has not really rejuvenated itself. I think it is that sense of hopelessness and demoralisation, and that people, I think, feel that it's it's impossible to fight this machine. But all we've got is each other. All we've got in the face of this power that's wielded by the state, by corporate capitalism, is each other, is solidarity. And when people recognise that when we stand in collective solidarity, we are incredibly powerful, and we can actually prevail. But it's trying to, get people to, realise that, and we saw it initially, I think, with that anti-war movement that led to 1 million people on the street. We saw it again with the Corbyn surge, both of which, unfortunately, were defeated, which makes it even harder now to regroup. But we have to regroup. We have to dust ourselves off, and we have to keep fighting.
We were talking about the infiltration. I'll just remind everybody, of course, it's only a year and a half since the government pushed through legislation which makes the illegal activity by state agents for this type of intervention in campaign groups and so on a legal thing, so they can break the law with impunity. Just remind everybody about that. But I'd be interested in I'm going to come back to Vanessa in a second, but do you think, because I've seen in the anti-war movement, as small as it is still in the United States, we're seeing people from all sides of the political spectrum coming together on that. Are you seeing the same thing in the UK?
Well, we're certainly trying to replicate that, and we've made very powerful links, actually, with the Rage Against the War machine in the United States. This is the No to NATO, No to War campaign that I'm talking about now. And they absolutely, they've had their difficulties, though, of course, because, you've got people in the US as well who are also obsessed with the, with the culture wars, etc. And they are saying that, we're not prepared to share a platform with X, Y, or Z because I don't like their views on A, B, and C, or that individual's, a right winger. I'm not going to collaborate with them. And what the Rage Against the War machine, I think, that the secret to their success has been that they've said, look, let's put all the other baggage, let's leave that at the door. do we agree that we are opposed to nuclear war? Do we agree that we want to, bring an end to the, to the war machine, to the proliferation of wars around the world? If the answer to that is yes, let's forget about everything else. Let's just focus on that. And that's what I've been trying to argue for. That's what we're arguing for in No to Next. We've been criticised, actually, because we've had people on the platform who I would kind of repudiate their political beliefs on a range of other topics. But on this issue, we agree. And I'm more than happy to, speak alongside those individuals if they're going to speak in unison against the horrors of war, against the horrors of nuclear war, against the horrors of colonialism and imperialism. And, surely, particularly for people who are socialists, that what we should be doing is trying to bring people together, trying to win people over by the force of our argument. But the problem we've encountered in Britain has been that even people on the left won't share platforms with or campaign alongside other people on the left because they disagree with them on some issue of identity politics, of trans rights or whatever it might be. And I'd be saying to people, look, for Christ's sake, can't we simply agree where we agree and just have fraternal disagreements where we don't? So to go even beyond that, which we've done in No to NATO, to say, well, look, let's just embrace all comers who have, because we've just one goal, we're opposed to war, opposed to NATO. Let's focus on that, and we'll work with anybody on that specific issue. And I think that is a powerful, if we can get that to fly, that's a very powerful modus operandi, and something that, of course, will really frighten the establishment, and something which I think is having some success in the US, probably more success than we're having so far in the UK, but it is something that we definitely need to do.
Vanessa, I couldn't agree more with that comment. And, the big trick of the British government for many years has been the whole divide and conquer thing. We've got to get past this.
Yeah, absolutely. It is not only a question of the size of the complex that we're fighting against. And I hear this all the time from people that understand how the West works here in Syria, that we as the so-called resistance need to be as organized, as united, as strong in solidarity, even if we disagree. I'm sure that most of them disagree with each other, but when it comes to the agenda and pushing the agenda forward, they're united. Partly they are incentivized, of course, which doesn't really enter the dialogue for us because obviously, we're frozen out of much of the ability to earn money for what we do. As Chris said, that most of the MPs are afraid to lose their position of privilege and wealth and influence, right? Privilege probably being top of that pile. But I think what I just wanted to ask you, Chris, you've touched on the unions, and I know that you're a strong advocate for unions and for their influence on our society. And of course, in my opinion, it's largely been infiltrated, as you mentioned, it's largely been co-opted. And I was kind of interested that you mentioned the Fire Brigade Union. I'll tell you why, because Mike will probably remember this, but at UK Column, at one point, we reached out to the Fire Brigade Union to try and talk to them about standing in solidarity, not with the CIA MI6 construct, which was the white helmets in Syria embedded with Al-Qaeda and other extremist armed groups and committing human rights crimes against Syrian civilians under their occupation, but to actually stand in solidarity with the real Syria Civil Defense, that is the only accepted civil defense organization by all the kind of umbrella organizations, the majority or the main one being based in Geneva. When we tried to speak to a representative, their response was quite staggering. They basically said, well, it's not really our problem, mate. Speak to the Home Office. So to what extent is the decimation of the power of the unions also had an influence on the anti-war movement and the understanding of what is actually going on with the government, successive government neo-colonialist policies?
Oh, I mean, a huge influence. Well, in terms of we talk about unions. I mean, I'm separating the kind of bureaucracy from the grassroots, but certainly the bureaucracy leadership of the trade unions. From each individual unions right the way through to the TUC, Trade Union Congress, have been dreadful of late, in particular in relation to war. We've got the GMB union, one of the biggest unions in the country, Gary Smith, their general secretary, pushing the TUC essentially to ally themselves with Nazis in Ukraine. I mean, the motion that they originally put forward was even more egregious than the one that was eventually composited down, which was marginally more palatable. But ultimately, they were voting in favour of the war. There's no reference to, peace negotiations, to the provocations that led to the war, the fact that the Atlantic Council were openly publishing articles with headlines like "The Strategic Case for Risking War with Russia," the fact that the US Defense Department had commissioned the RAND Corporation to do a study on ways to weaken Vladimir Putin and Russia and to balkanize the country because there are rich pickings to be had. The fact that NATO rejected out of hand Russia's proposal for peace and security in Europe prior to the military operation. No reference in the debate, as I understand it, at the TUC, and certainly nothing in the motion, which was eventually agreed, about the coup that was supported in Ukraine by the United States, a violent coup supported by the United States and by the European Union. And that coup was led by literal Nazis. No reference to that. And so, they've been very much involved. And I mean, they make the argument as well, and particularly trade unions like the GMB and to some extent sections of Unite, that, there's jobs to be had from the so-called defense industry, from the armaments industry. But, that's a misplaced viewpoint in any event, because if you look at the statistics, it shows that in, I think it was 1981, there was something in the order of 460,000 people in the United Kingdom working in the armaments industry, and that figure had hemorrhaged. I mean, the last time I looked at it, the figure was 2-3 years back. It had gone right down to something about 150,000, 140,000. I can't remember the precise figure, so don't actually quote me on those precise figures, but they were in that ballpark. So basically 2/3 of the people had lost their jobs anyway in that industry. And I've been arguing that what you should be pushing for in the trade union movement is defence diversification. This is something that Jeremy was putting forward in his original leadership pitch on Trident in particular. Obviously, he was calling for scrapping Trident, but was saying that we could use the investment which is going into Trident to invest in new high-tech engineering skills, and could actually create probably 3 or 4 times more high-tech, high-skilled jobs, commanding those higher salaries, etc. So yes, the trade union movements have been, trade union leadership anyway, have been really appalling on this, on the grounds of jobs, etc. Some misplaced so-called solidarity with the Ukrainian people, for example. I mean, it's just really terrible. And the trade union movement, I think, could be and should be a much bigger force for raising political consciousness in this country. I mean, it's 6 or 7 million people there, kind of a captive audience, where the trade unions could really be doing a huge, important role in exposing the military-industrial complex, exposing the corporate capitalist world, giving people that information, because knowledge is power. And then we've got a situation where somebody who is doing that, in the Russell Brand, who I previously mentioned, who's using his platform with 6 or 7 million people to expose the abuses of neoliberalism and the war machine, and et cetera, is being taken down. And there's a massive lynch mob on social media, which is comprised predominantly of so-called lefties, the liberal left. And talk about shooting yourself in the foot again. So somebody who is really important truth teller, like Julian. Well, I'm not putting him in the same category as Julian Assange, obviously. I don't think Russell Brand would put himself in the same category either. But somebody who is challenging this the status quo is being silenced. That's the name of the game. And of course, they used spurious allegations of sexual misconduct against Julian Assange as well. And there was a feeding frenzy, and Labour MPs signing up, calling for his immediate removal from the UK to Sweden. And even Jeremy Corbyn, who was leader at the time, was saying, well, Julian Assange needs to face these charges. Rather than acknowledging that this is clearly a scam that's going on here. And again, I was sounds like I'm blowing my own trumpet. I was the only MP that was willing to stand up and say, no, this ain't right. We should be supporting Julian Assange. So it is very, very disappointing, to say the least. And the trade union movement leadership does have a lot to answer. But if you look back in history, it's always been the way. Even back to the 1926 general strike, it was the Labour Party and the TUC leadership that sort of capitulated and betrayed that huge opportunity that was there, where the working class had been mobilised, but they let them down.
Okay, so you've brought Russell Brand and Julian Assange into this, and this is maybe a good time to move on to that topic, because back in 2017, 2018 time, of course, we had two events. I suppose one was that we discovered that the Counter-Disinformation and Media Development Programme existed in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And the other thing was the Integrity Initiative was exposed. And I'm glad to say we had a certain contribution to make in that, because we discovered that the address that they were using was a disused derelict mill. So it was clearly something extremely bogus and underhand about that organisation. But anyway, in 2017, I came across the name Andy Price. And I put a Freedom of Information request into the Foreign Office to find out about Andy Price, about his team. I asked what size is his team, how much money do they have, and this kind of thing. And I was hitting a stone wall extremely quickly. I went to the Information Commissioner, and in fairness to them, as understaffed and underfunded as they are, they did their best. And around the time that we're going to put your parliamentary question on screen in a second, but around the time that you were asking your parliamentary questions about Integrity Initiative and about the Russia initiative in the Foreign Office, the Information Commissioner on my behalf was in the Foreign Office asking for information. And what was fascinating about it, Chris, was that at the end of the day, you got an answer from, I think, Alan Duncan to your parliamentary questions. And I got an answer via the Information Commissioner, and the text was identical in both cases. Yeah. So clearly, but anyway, I wanted to just briefly bring the parliamentary questions that you asked in December 2018 on screen, because this is quite an important part of this story. So you asked to ask the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, pursuant to Answer 3 in December 2018, on Foreign and Commonwealth Office Integrity Initiative, first of all, if he will publish his department's documents and correspondence on grant agreements for the Integrity Initiative. And the answer that you got from Alan Duncan was talking about the Foreign Office's Counter-Disinformation and Media Development Team, that an example was the Russian disinformation campaign that followed the attack in Salisbury. This was a justification for this team existing, which was intended to distract from Russian culpability. Documents and correspondence about projects within the programme will not be published, as this information will then be used to actively attempt to disrupt and undermine the programme's effectiveness. But you then asked the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs what the amount and the recipient name was for grants paid from the FCO-led Russian language program in the latest period, and which figures are available. In fact, you were given the same answer to that question. You then asked about Integrity Initiative and whether funding provided to the Institute for Statecraft, which ran the Integrity Initiative, was through the Foreign and Commonwealth Office-led Russian language program, which they then acknowledged that it was, and that was funded by the Counter-Disinformation and Media Development Program team. So this little team is clearly extremely secretive. The justification that the Foreign Office gave for not answering my information request was on the grounds of national security. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, because clearly here what we had was an organization based in the Foreign Office, which counter to the narrative at the time that it was only dealing with disinformation coming from abroad and therefore only operating abroad. In fact, the Integrity Initiative, which it funded, was operating in the UK as well, helping to drive a war narrative, an anti-Russian war narrative initially.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and very much we're pushing that agenda, and that was one of the issues that perhaps also made me unpopular with the likes of Alan Duncan, who described me in his book, his diaries, parliamentary diaries, as the most hated man in Parliament, which was quite a nice accolade, frankly. Of all the people to be hated by, I couldn't think of a better cohort, actually, because I would be worried actually if I was liked by them, if I'm honest. But yeah, I mean, I went to visit that disused warehouse that you mentioned or disused mill or whatever it was in Octamuchy, I think it's called, near Dundee. And you're absolutely right. It is derelict. I mean, or semi-derelict. There's one or two business units in there. And what we also discovered was, as well as them being bankrolled to multi-million pound, to the tune of multi-million pound grants from the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and indeed from the Ministry of Defence as well, actually. And that was only for over an 18-month, slightly less period of time. And for all the talk about countering Russian disinformation, if you believe that, what we always also discovered is that they were attacking Jeremy Corbyn and prominent members of the Labour Party, and that was what should have been a scandal. If it was a mini scandal, as it were, and they were highly embarrassed, I think, that came out. And I made a complaint to the Scottish equivalent of the Charity Commission, where they're registered as a charity, and they did make a ruling that they were acting out with the charitable aims. So I know some people have suggested that was the main reason that I was attacked. I'm not sure that's necessarily true, but it certainly didn't help my cause, I suppose. And it's pretty clear that you had. I mean, I guess, and again, that's just sort of scraping the the little bit of the iceberg, as it were. We're only getting that's just one project. I mean, there'll be many others as well, I'm sure. I did actually try to doorstep the Integrity Initiative or the Institute for Statecraft in London as well, but had the door slammed in my face. I think it was Chris Donnelly that did that, former intelligence operative, I believe. So yeah, I mean, what's happening, I think, is they're kind of outsourcing a lot of their activities, aren't they, to contractors now, the intelligence services, and it's a very, very dangerous and slippery slope, it seems to me, that we're on. And again, we need to be calling this out, challenging it, it seems to me, and bringing this to the attention of the public, because that's what they hate. They hate this kind of, because they want to kind of operate in the shadows, don't they? But it's had all the hallmarks, didn't it, when it came to my attention, of the Operation Mockingbird that was exposed or revealed by the Church Committee following the Watergate scandal. But this is even more wide-ranging, it seems to me, than Operation Mockingbird was, which discovered that the intelligence services in the States were, got tame journalists on their books, and they were placing stories in the media there that basically reinforced the state's sort of position on different issues. They were infiltrating the student movement, the civil rights movement. But the Integrity Initiative went much further than just the United Kingdom. I mean, they had operatives throughout Europe, maybe further than that, clusters as they called them, and they were mobilised when Pedro Baños was in line to become the head of Homeland Security, I think it was, in Spain. He's an author, a senior figure in the Spanish military. But he'd made some softball remarks about Russia. Again, I'm paraphrasing what he was saying, but essentially he was making the point that Russia really doesn't really have a negative impact, if you like, on Spain's national interests. That was a sense, I think, of what he was saying. I mean, and for that, he was absolutely demonized. He didn't get the role. I mean, he was in line. It was a shoo-in, apparently, to become the head of Homeland Security there. He was then dropped from that role. He had a book out that was pulped, actually, apparently. I think it was Penguin, and I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it was Penguin. He had a book deal. I mean, and he was attacked as an anti-Semite, the usual default sort of smear. He'd got this lucrative book deal, but that was then withdrawn. And as I say, the books that hadn't been printed, they pulled them. It's incredible. I mean, this is at the behest of this Integrity Initiative cluster that got to work. And it wasn't just in terms of media, it was academics, it was a range of different people in influential positions in this country and across Europe who are going to be mobilised at a moment's notice. And there was some interesting high-profile journalists on their list of British journalistic clusters, including David Aronovich as one of them, and Carol Cadwallader was another one. They all claimed it was very innocent, but nevertheless, there we are. I mean, they were named as part of the Integrity Initiative's clusters. I don't know, I can't say, which, if any, articles that they produced were at the behest of the Integrity Initiative, but it's interesting that they seem to be on the Integrity Initiative's books.
So the question then is, to what degree would we be pursuing a war policy globally, and in parallel with that, to what degree would the attack on Jeremy Corbyn, or the attack on yourself, have succeeded without the full cooperation of the media? And is it the case that the media is simply an arm of the deep state, or is it the media is infiltrated by operations like Integrity Initiative?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty clear it is an arm of the deep state. How that manifests itself, whether it's through infiltration or other means, remains the same. But the end product is the same thing, it seems to me, and that has been the case since time immemorial, really, I suppose. But I mean, Julian Assange has said that the illegal wars that have taken place. Well, he made the point, didn't he? All wars are started by lies, and if wars can be started by lies, truth can be started. Peace can be started by truth. I mean, the way in which the journalists have operated in terms of facilitating wars. They actually created the environment, public opinion, to support the war in Iraq. They provided the justification for it. They provided justification for the Afghanistan issue. The whole kind of war on terror, etc. So they've absolutely been willing agents of the state forever, it seems to me. That's why the platforms like this and the growth of independent platforms is so important. And of course, one of the reasons why big tech is doing its level best to minimise their impact.
Yes, and Vanessa, of course, you have been on the receiving end. I mean, Chris has been on the receiving end of quite some nasty behaviour from journalists, but perhaps Chris's life hasn't been put at risk.
Well, yeah, I mean, the BBC ran for at least 3 years a hate campaign, really, against me, which resulted in them doxing my car in Syria, publishing the number plate on the front page of the BBC website, which was clearly a kind of a dog whistle to any extremist factions to attack me. I mean, they did remove the number plate, but the damage was already done. So yeah, and I mean, if I can, I just wanted to ask one thing, Mike, which was, I mean, I was refused admission to the NUJ, not in the UK, interestingly enough, but in Paris, because of my alleged anti-Semitism. in articles from my blog based upon my own personal experience of Israeli aggression against the people of Gaza in 2012 and then going forward in Syria, etc. Of course, there are friends of Israel in the Labour Party, in the Tory Party, and so on. And Israel has huge influence, I believe, politically in our country, but not only politically, industrially, through its expansion into every sector of our life, I believe, in the UK and in the EU, but we're focusing on the UK. To what extent, Chris, is that influence sustaining the bipartisan war parties? And to what extent is that expanding now? Since Corbyn went, are we seeing a correlation in the expansion of the power of the Israel lobby in the UK, both through political means, diplomatic means, mediatic means, etc.?
I think we are, and the government's just signed off a new arrangement, collaboration with the Israeli state on basically every facet of life in the country. Education, industrially, right across the piece. The role, the influence of the Israel lobby in Parliament is immense. When I was in Parliament, there were probably half, if not more, of the Parliamentary Labour Party were actually members of the so-called Labour Friends of Israel. There was, I think it was around 80% of the Conservative MPs were members of their equivalent of it, as it were. And they wield enormous power. And whether people actively support them, obviously a lot do in influential positions. Others are intimidated because of the influence that they have to not actually challenge, not to push back against the abuse of power that they undoubtedly wield. So it is worrying. I mean, of course, you've got the leader of the Labour Party now, Sir Keir Starmer, is on record as saying he supports Zionism without qualification. Prior to him, you've got Gordon Brown going and speaking in the Knesset, etc. Gordon Brown, indeed, just around about the time I was suspended, it may have been just after, making a video urging people to join the so-called Jewish Labour movement, which had actually only been reconstituted to undermine Jeremy Corbyn and to fight back against the BDS movement. So yes, I think all the evidence shows that we are finding this out more and more in the show that I present for Press TV called Palestine Declassified, and basically we expose the Israeli regime's global war against solidarity with the illegally occupied people of Palestine, and it's right across the piece in the media, even in the music industry, definitely in the kind of wider industrial field in that sense. So yes, they do wield huge influence. They don't like what we do on Palestine Declassified because we're exposing them. This notion that knowledge is power is very, very true and important, and that's what we're doing as much as we can to shine a light on what these characters are up to. Of course, I think always the default position, isn't it? That it's just anti-Semitic. We hate Jews. It's just absolutely absurd. But it's Shlomo Aloni, the former Israeli minister who let the cat out of the bag 20 odd years ago on Democracy Now, when she's been interviewed on that platform, said, well, it's a trick that we always use. Anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial is another one that they do. But I think people are wising up to it, despite all the best endeavours, despite the adoption of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism by the Labour Party and by various institutions around the country, universities and so on and so forth. More and more people are waking up to the abuse of the Israeli state. They've overplayed their hand, it seems to me. And when then we saw that the most recent bombardment against Gaza by the Zionist entity, the rallies that took place around this country were enormous. And in fact, just on my own hometown of Derby, it was literally the biggest rally that we've ever seen in Derby. And people were supporting it. There was a march on 2 days, and people were literally coming out of the shops and pubs to join in the march or to simply applaud. And because I think what we're finding through independent platforms like yours, through social media, through, if you like, citizen journalists on the ground in Gaza using smartphones to actually record what is happening. And, many of the people there, they speak good English, and they're able to impart, they'll upload this information onto the internet. So more and more people, are seeing the reality, which conflicts 180 degrees from the propaganda. And so they're losing the battle, it seems to me. And obviously the resistance on the ground in Palestine is growing stronger. And it's being supported by Iran. And of course, that's another reason why, Iran is so demonized, because it is lending its practical support to the resistance in Palestine against the Zionist colonizers.
One more thing, related back to the counter disinformation media development program in a sense, but Big Brother Watch, of course, have been discussing that and other censorship related issues. One of the things that they were discussing recently was the activities of 77 Brigade and the fact that 77 Brigade had been apparently surveilling everybody, including MPs. And of course, we still have an MP serving, although he's lost his job as chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Elwood, who's a reservist for 77 Brigade. Now, going back to 2013, Rory Stewart, MP, attended the Bilderberg Group. And at the time, we asked him in what capacity did he attend? Was he there personally or as an MP? And what did he discuss? And of course, he refused to tell us what he discussed because he claimed that MPs are entitled to a private public life. And that seemed a very strange position to take to us, because if you're serving a serving MP, you're supposed to be serving the people, then everything that you do in service to the people should be public, it seemed to us. And Tobias Elwood has fallen back on the same excuse. He is saying he will not divulge whether he has been on active service while he's been sitting as an MP, because he's entitled, that's a private matter, and he's entitled to keep that private. And in fact, a Freedom of Information request to the Ministry of Defence garnered the same thing. They said they have the information. They'll neither confirm or deny whether Tobias Elwood has been serving while he's been an MP on 77 Brigade. But I wanted to ask you, what is your view of this position that an MP, a serving MP, is entitled to a private public life?
Well, I don't think that was what you just, the examples you just outlined there. I mean, that doesn't constitute a private life, it seems to me. I mean, yes, everybody's entitled to a private life to some extent, but when you are engaged in activities, like that, like the Bilderberg Group or whatever, or the Trilateral Commission that Roy Stewart was also a member of in the past, as was the Sakir Starmer, then that is a matter of public interest, it seems to me. And I don't think that excuse is legitimate in any way, shape or form. And, the fact that, they've used that excuse, I think, is very revealing in itself. And I think many, many people, would be horrified to learn that, parliamentarians, were using their position to be involved in these sorts of nefarious bodies, which, can have, do have a profound impact on our daily lives. That is surely a matter that should be in the public domain, and there should be no excuse, it seems to me, that they can legitimately put forward to obfuscate and avoid providing that level of information. But our system is broken. That's the tragedy of it, and we need to essentially start again. And that's why, coming back to the point we were talking about earlier on in our conversation, the importance of trying to build, an alternative, coherent movement to challenge some of this is so crucially important. And again, to keep going back to the importance of platforms like yours, really, really crucial that we do support them, because you do give an alternative perspective, and the more people that we can upskill with that knowledge, I think the more chance we'll have of building a coherent movement that, that can challenge the status quo. But they are obviously very well dug in and are incredibly powerful. And that's why, it comes back to that other point I made about solidarity, really, about collective action, because that's the power that we've got when we stand together. And that's what frightened them so much about Jeremy Corbyn. And I think it's what frightens them, actually, about Russell Brand as well. When he went on a speaking tour and went on various shows in the United States of America, there was huge support, from the audience, of cheers and applause of approval for some of the exposés that he was using, those opportunities, those interviews to bring about, the abuses of power, etc., big pharma and the military-industrial complex, etc. That's why they seek to close him down. That's why they spent so much time and effort into destroying the Corbyn project, because ultimately it was popular and it was reaching people that had turned off politics. I mean, that was a thing that I think frightened them as well. That many people who'd given up on politics were being inspired to get involved, and the Labour Party grew to become the biggest party in Western Europe. Although you'd never know it with the sort of level of adverse publicity that Corbyn was subjected to. But again, to come back to what we were saying at the top of the discussion, Jeremy, didn't seize the moment. Really, he allowed his enemies, our enemies, to prevail by not actually using the power that he had at his disposal there with this huge mass movement, which could have continued to grow, I think, had Jeremy seized that opportunity to really build an embedded social movement that would have facilitated, I think, that potential irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power that 1974 Labour Party manifesto talked about, and to some extent what Jeremy was hoping to do. And I think in conclusion, we need to look at the examples of Latin America, and perhaps the most recent one in Bolivia, where a US-backed coup that ousted Evo Morales just after he'd won a landslide election victory. The movement towards socialism in Bolivia brought the country to a standstill, and within less than 12 months, they forced the coup regime to hold new elections, and the socialists stormed back to power with an even bigger majority than Morales achieved in the previous year. That's a model that we should be seeking to replicate, it seems to me. And what they recognize there, and I've spoken to people in Bolivia, what they recognize there, that it's so crucial that you don't put all your eggs in the electoral basket, as it were. Yes, elections are important. Getting elected representatives is an important aspect of trying to bring about change. But unless you've got that strength in depth, unless you've got that solid social movement behind it, then they inevitably end up losing their way. And that's why they, I think, were so successful, and why they've put that front and center. That social movement is from their perspective is the key thing, the most important thing, more important even than the sort of elections per se. And that's so it proved to be, didn't it? So it proved to be in what happened. We could only have to look at the evidence of our own eyes, just very recent history, where they were able to push back against a US-backed coup. Incredible achievement, really, when you think about it, and you think of the history of US interventions around the globe. So that's the prize, as difficult as it is to bring about. But those of us that believe in that, we have to keep fighting and keep pushing, and to try and bring that collective sense of power to an ever increasing number of people, to give them the confidence that when we do work together, when we do stand together, then we can overcome all the challenges that are put in our way.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And just to finish, Chris, just let people know how they can follow your work.
Yeah, well, I'm on social media, so it's at Chris W. No, it's not. It's at Darby Chris. I'm getting it wrong. Actually, it's at Darby Chris W on Twitter. And if you just search me on Facebook, just my name, Chris Williams. I've got two. I've got a personal platform and then a Facebook page. I'm not brilliant at this new technology and so on and so forth. But they're the two areas that I'm most active on. And if I could just give a quick plug, if I may, for my book, which is 10 Years of Hard Labour, which actually sets out the that period of history from 2010 through to 2020 that was there was such a potential, really. I mean, there was talking about a roller coaster of emotions, really. I mean, it was a really significant period in our history, and I've tried to plot it from my perspective, really, in terms of what I witnessed, and I've also given some thoughts about how we might be able to move forward, as it were. But if people are interested in that tumultuous period of history, I would hope people would consider looking, either buying a book or downloading the Audible app, which it's now available in that format as well. And if people are interested in that, the details of where to purchase my book can be obtained because it's pinned to the top of my Twitter profile.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll say thank you very much to Chris Williamson and to Vanessa Beeley for joining us today. That's been a hugely interesting conversation. I'm sure it's going to garner a lot of response. So thank you both, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.